Hello and welcome. Hopefully you can hear us loud and clear. You should also be able to see our lovely presenters, Asif and Ian, who we'll be handing over to in a short moment. This is really a talk all about how we could improve the adoption of your quality management system and help you both achieve and improve your quality assurance generally. There's an option to raise questions. Many of you will be familiar, especially this last couple of years, with this type of platform, but we do encourage questions. I think we've allowed 10 minutes towards the end to cater for any queries that you may have along the way. So do feel free to drop into the questions section of this webinar software in the bottom right. So a little bit about us. I'm really hosting this session, which is nice, not too much talking from me. I'll then be handing over to Ian Yallop, who is the chairman at Stephen George & Partners, a national and an AJ 100 architectural practice, and Asif Malik, who is principal at Asif Malik Architecture, but also the QA advisor to RIBA. And as I said, we then have some Q&A towards the end. So just quickly, a little bit about Flow 10 if you're unaware of who we are. We're actually a technology platform used by many leading architects, engineers and consultants. And our agenda, our focus is really how do we help you improve your practice-wide awareness of what's going on, your access to information and tracking your key project deliverables and making that as easy and straightforward as possible. We're aware that often people have lots of different systems already. Actually, Flow 10, part of what we do is to bring that together and make that a clearer, more straightforward experience for staff wherever they might be, and it certainly drive home the need that people have to actually update key information along the project journey. And really, I think this is a moment of reflection. This time of year, we should be looking back on what we did well in 2021, but we should be looking forward to 2022 and beyond in terms of what our resolutions might be. And I think, number one, we need to honour and keep the traditions that work well for us, but we need to remove and forget those that don't. Often we need to be better organised individually, but as a team, and we need to work smarter. So I think the key point I would make before handing over to Ian is that Flow 10 and our clients, we're concerned about what happens when people go into the digital filing cabinet. What are they going to find, especially when some of the projects you're working on are at scale, some of them or in some cases you're working on a high volume of work. What happens when you go into that filing cabinet in the future? We're not too sure, and certainly you'll be doing spot checks and making efforts to both record and audit what's there, but it's not an easy task, and that's where I'll hand over to Ian, who over the last couple of years has been working hard as a practice in terms of the way that they do things. So just bear with me, and I'll pass over to Ian now.
Flow 10 as an architect's perspective on it, really. The first year as a practice, we've got 5 offices throughout the UK, and we also work on a number of different sectors. So a lot of those sectors we work on collaboratively between our offices. So the question we had was, well, why do we need project tracking? And what we've seen sort of post-Grenfell is a big change in the environment we work in. PI insurers are far more onerous in terms of the requirements they have. A lot of elements such as the golden thread, how do we follow information right through the whole process and lifetime of a project? How do we deal with quality assurance? And that's becoming an increasingly large part of each project. Increased legislation, things are becoming a lot more complex, and that complexity generates a lot more paperwork, a lot more reports. And accountability is important. How do we know that we've done things at the right time? And clarity, how do we find the right piece of information? So all of those things led us to examine what we have in terms of project tracking. And this isn't new. Architects have always recorded project information. We've traditionally used daybooks and filing cabinets to store and record all of our information. It was hard work, but we all did it and got used to it. With the advent of computers, we thought, great, there's this great big bucket that we can drop everything in. We can use a search engine to find all that information very, very easily. But the information we get out is only as good as that information we put in at the beginning. And because we became lazy at naming things, it meant that every time we had to look for a piece of information, it was like looking for the proverbial needle in a haystack. Drawings and documents were named incorrectly, possibly filed in the wrong locations. So we came to the conclusion that we needed some help. So on that basis, we called in Flow 10 to help us set up Tracker. So what is Tracker? Well, it's effectively an interface between the document management system, so what we term the big bucket of information and data that's sitting there, and the project team. So that was an interface that allows us to find information quickly, and also to find the correct information. So a system that sort of displays the key information we need, the up-to-date information, and makes it easily accessible. And we also wanted something more than that. We wanted a guide that people can follow through the project process to make sure that all items are ticked as we go through. So everything we're required to do is done and easily accessible. So the slide here just gives you a snapshot of what we call Tracker, which is the interface between us and our sort of information storage system. And it follows through the RIBA work stages. We've got the sort of a separate section up here at the moment, which is our appointments and framework section. But you'll see there it launches off with strategic definition at stage 0. It displays the work stages we're currently working to, so technical design on this particular example. It displays in green the items that we've completed. It flags up items that are incomplete without a deadline, and items in red that are incomplete that do have a deadline, and then grayed out areas that are non-applicable. And this leads us through a process that we follow through on every project. It also gives us information at a glance as to where we have things that are potentially overdue, when things are due, so it gives us that project timeline as well, and allows me to access easily a group of my projects or my team's projects to see what tasks might be overdue, linking also into things like hours recorded on timesheets and invoices, so it gives us that overall approach. I was going to drop into Tracker now, but I've had to flip computers, so I'll talk through this one very, very quickly. So each task, it allows us to click to open a task, and within that task, it provides guidance. So we can put notes in telling staff what they need to do at each stage. It also has hyperlinks in it that we can link into key documents. And it also has an element that allows us to just drag and drop from the desktop the information we want to store in that placeholder. And that information then sits there, is up to date and easily accessible on this front screen rather than trawling through a whole host of documents. It displays key data that we may want. So for example, level of PI insurance or building height, those things. So at a glance, anybody can come into this project, see where we are in the process and access that key information or any particular notes. We can also allocate tasks to certain people. So for example, a credit check on a company goes to our accounts team. So that's an automatic process that they then fill in and populate the system. So for us, it actually allows us to access all of that information very quickly and very easily. So how do we implement it? Well, this is always the problem with systems, and it comes down, a lot of it is to the quality of the brief. So what did we give to Flow 10, Matthew and his team, to enable us to set this up? Firstly, it's important to understand what you need, and that takes a lot of time to really drill down and think, what are the key bits of information we need to display? And on this element, I'd say don't be over ambitious. It's very easy to think of a very, very complex system that gives you everything you need. But I would say start off simply, keep it simple and deliverable, so you get sort of quick wins and then build on that strong base. Important to map it out as well with each stage. Some of these have built-in intelligence, so there's questions that you answer that then direct you to the next task, so that the tasks appear depending on the answers you make. So there's a sort of flowchart approach to that. And also review and challenge what you think you need early on, because we went through a number of iterations on how we set this up. We had some small working groups, we challenged it, we simplified it. And then when you roll it out, communicate it. And that's really one of the key elements is communication. How do we explain to staff what's needed, the benefits to them, and how to use it? In terms of mapping it out, this is just an extract from the appointments section of Tracker, and our practice directors set this process up to basically show how those tasks happen. And each of these boxes is a task, and you then have questions that you answer that lead off to other branches, and some of these branches actually loop back round to the beginning. So there's a lot of complexity built into this, but what it means is that a complex process of agreeing an appointment, it goes through in stages. It's sort of almost yes no answers to lead you on to the next stage. And we did this on a number of the more complex tasks so that people could understand the process and what was happening. Communication engagement, I said, is important, and really that's one of the vital elements. Explaining what the system is in simple terms, what the benefit is to staff, and then trying to get staff engagement. So we involved a number of different teams, different disciplines in formulating the process to try and get that staff engagement and to try and get people to take ownership of it. We have had to use a carrot and stick process. We've encouraged wherever we can, but this year we made the use of Tracker a mandatory element on people's reviews. So that way they don't get a bonus if they're not using it. So we have had to use the stick approach as well. Unfortunately, the carrot wasn't quite enough. It's also important to have a feedback loop, a very simple process that people can add notes easily if something goes wrong. And this is a task we've asked Matthew's team to look for us, a little sort of feedback button on Tracker, so people don't have to go out into a different system. They can click on the button, add a comment, and it goes through into the process, a bit like a ticketing system. As a practice now, I think we've now reached the tipping point where people are realizing that the accessibility of information through Tracker is good, it is important, and it is making people's jobs easier and easier to find information. So I'll stop talking now and hand back over to Matthew.
Thank you very much, Ian. That's great. Impressive as well that you've incorporated it into the people's personal development reviews. So it'd be good to perhaps touch on that a little in terms of the need to do that and the importance you're placing on it within the practice. At this stage, this is quite an exciting moment in itself as well, because as if you're not going to be doing a conventional talk. I say conventional in terms of using PowerPoint. You're going to be talking to us, and I'll hand over to you now in terms of your thoughts. I suppose just for everybody who's unfamiliar with Asif, Asif is available to help as a consultant around quality assurance and helps many practices to both have a strategic but also operational day-to-day quality management process. Asif, over to you.
Yes, no slides, no pictures, just a talking head. So I'll try and make the most of that. My name is Asif Malik. I'm an architect and have many years of active architectural practice. ranging from key roles in large architectural practices, as well as acting as a sole practitioner. What I do have a keen interest in is promoting the benefits of a structured system, which is not very far from what has been spoken already by Matthew and Ian. But what I'm trying to promote is a system which will allow practices to work more effectively. Systems can be very useful, and the description we've just heard shows some of the benefits you can get. A system can be something very simple. You might prepare a shopping list before going to the supermarket. That's a system. If you work in an architectural practice, you may have systems of many kinds. Simple ones like a list of potential clients, a drawing register, or a site safety checklist. There may be standard forms and templates you use to help you to carry out essential tasks. What a good system will do is to bring all this together in a coordinated fashion. And the industry standard for the structure that allows you to do this for architectural practices is ISO 9001. I saw that many delegates attending today are established practices and will quite likely have achieved accreditation to this standard. But whether you're in that category or at an early stage of creating a system, it may be helpful for you to have an overview of the overall picture. So you can get a clear understanding of reaching 9001 accreditation, or if you already have it, how to make the most of it. Now, I think at its most fundamental level, there are two principal benefits. A structured system will allow you to work effectively, to make the best of your resources, to minimize the risk of things going wrong. It'll bring consistency across all your activities so that all staff in your practice work to define coordinated standards, whether these are people working in different office locations or working on different projects, or when you get new recruits who can be inducted into the way of the practice working by referring them to the system. And it is very good risk management. Professional indemnity insurers really like it when you're able to say to them, look, we've got ISO 9001, so that is already a mark of confidence in their books. The standard itself is written in a language which is not everyday English. It can be difficult to follow. So it's important to understand the application of the various parts of the system, or of the standard. And the one way some practices do it is to draw a distinction between a quality manual, if you have manuals are quite commonly used, a quality manual and an operations manual. The quality manual is the strategic part, which sets out your application of and understanding of the concepts of the system, whereas the operational part is how you do your various tasks. So that's the first principal benefit. The second one, of course, is the commercial benefit. If you can say to people you are 9001 registered, it creates confidence amongst your clients, other members of the project team, the consultants, the constructors, the funders. And it is already the case that 9001 registration is a precondition for being considered for new commissions, particularly in the public sector. Showing that you are registered on your website and on your publications, in your marketing documentation, really sets you up as someone who a practice that does things in a structured way. So what is behind an ISO registration? Why should you have accreditation to 9001? Well, it is the industry standard. It is recognized not just nationally, but internationally. But it is useful to appreciate that the system is not geared specifically to architects or even to other professionals. It's used for all kinds of services and products, including manufacturing. I noticed the other day getting on the bus locally, the bus company is registered to ISO 9001. So a 9001 system compliant for 9001 compliant system for architects has to be designed with the specific needs of architectural activity. And a system should be designed not only with that specific focus, but for the specific needs of your own practice. So it is quite important to customize a system to your own needs, to your own requirements. So going for the registration provides a way of designing a system on this internationally recognized basis. It is based on system requirements that have been drawn up by systems experts. So designing your system on this basis gives you the base structure. So you don't have to go and design a structure from scratch. You've already got this base structure, which is in place and recognized. So in the short time available, I'll just won't go into too much detail, but I'll just pick up 2 or 3 key points. The first is buy-in. It is important for buy-in at all levels in your practice, from top management to all staff. Top management really needs to engage actively with the adoption of the system and its maintenance. And all staff need to see a system as a normal way of working. It's not a box-ticking add-on. It's just the way you work and you run your practice. And I do recognize that for many, this is a bit of a cultural shift. But in due course, people do see the benefits of accepting this as their way of working. Another key aspect is audits. The system requires you to carry out audits. There are internal audits, which could be carried out by your own trained staff or by an external consultant, usually twice a year, and external audits by an accreditation agency, usually once a year. Now, this I've found is a really good discipline. And picking up on the words in one of Matthew's slides, Renzo Piano was saying about discipline and rules. This ties in with that. It's a great incentive for following the system and just keeps you on your toes, and just having the audit twice a year really keeps the thing ticking over very nicely. There is RIBA guidance available. If you're a chartered practice, you can find an easy to follow guide for setting up a new system or developing your existing system. And this was a guide which I co-authored with Alex Tate at the RIBA at the time that the current version of the standard, which is 2015, came into effect. So I would emphasize that adopting a new 9001 system or making the best use of an existing system will bring many benefits. One just needs to be aware there is a level of commitment and a willingness to devote a reasonable level of resources, principally in time, to make it work. The process does need to be undertaken carefully and not rushed. And following on what I was saying earlier, it is important that the system is customized to your own requirements. There is not a one-size-fits-all solution anywhere. And this applies to all types and sizes of practices. So initially it can be a bit daunting because mainly I think because of the way the language is put out in the ISO standard. So once you are able to understand how to make that work within the context of architectural work, then it really does become a lot easier, and you can relate your own activities to particular clauses and tie the whole thing together. And in a way, what I'm promoting here coordinates beautifully with what Flow 10 is doing, because we're both trying to do essentially the same thing, have structured systems which allow you to work more effectively. So with that, I'll end this little talk and open to any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Asif. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. I suppose the challenge is that we're dealing with people, and people sometimes have their own agendas. So with that in mind, we do have some questions that relate to that for either of you. Perhaps it would be good to understand if it's publicly shareable. Ian, just in terms of a question from Janet, who asks, how should we deal with colleagues that don't think they need to follow the rules?
Yeah, it's an interesting one actually, and a problem we have had, and I think that's why we had to introduce the stick as well as the carrot. So we have a profit share bonus element, and for you to be able to take account of that, you need to fulfill a number of mandatory elements. And this year, demonstrating use of Tracker was one of those mandatory elements. So that did work well. We were fairly lenient actually. We took the view, as long as people were showing that they were beginning to engage with the process, that was a good start, and then we'll build on that next year. So that was one element. The second element, Asif was mentioning the QA audits, and staff get pulled in for QA audits sort of once or twice a year. It can be any member of staff, and those using Tracker just find the process so much easier because all the information they need is there readily available in one screen without having to go and search for all the information. So actually the feedback has come from staff over a couple of years that actually doing this is no more difficult than using a daybook or filing stuff as you would do normally, but there are huge benefits to it. And I think we've just about reached that tipping point now where there's a sort of weight of momentum behind it, and we're seeing the take up of it growing quite rapidly now.
Yeah, and I think one other question here from somebody called Sean is, this is probably a number of questions in one perhaps, but it'd be interesting on your view, Asif and Ian. We have a project director that says we're in full control. He does monthly review meetings. I think I've witnessed this myself. It's a case of they're doing audits regularly, but I think it's often longhand. Asif, you mentioned about internal audits. What's the sort of expectation in terms of a best practice for that?
Internal audits are very useful on two levels. Firstly, they enable your own the staff within a practice to get engaged in a process from the operational side, as it were. They're implementing the system by carrying out the audit. And the architects whose jobs are being audited do find this a discipline in that they have to be prepared. And if they've got a system like Flow 10 where they can have easy access to all the key information, it makes it easier for them. So there's another incentive that if your information is in good order, you have nothing to fear.
Yeah.
And the follow-up is very important. If something does appear to be amiss, then the appointed auditor does need to go back and check that it's been cleared and the problem has been resolved.
Wonderful. Great. Okay, well, I'm conscious of time, and these sessions are supposed to instigate thought, encourage just further discovery. We can't cover everything in 30 minutes, but I do think that's been really interesting, both from yourself, Asif, and Ian, and genuinely a huge thanks both to yourselves, but also everybody who's been able to join us over their lunchtime. There will be, and we've been asked this in terms of a question as well, in terms of will a recording be available? Yes, certainly it will be. That'll be available over the next day or two, as will be, I'm sure, the three of us for further conversations or responses to questions should they arise after this immediate meeting. And then on the Flow 10 website, that's where we'll also put the recording, but there are others on there as well that are well worth a listen. So with that, a big thank you again, and have a good afternoon. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you.